Welcome to the Practical Enneagram. Denise Grobbelaar is a clinical psychologist, psychotherapist and Jungian analyst in private practice in Cape Town, South Africa. She's affiliated with the South African Association of Jungian Analysts and the International Association of Jungian Analysts. Denise is also an accredited Enneagram practitioner, having gone through Integrative Enneagram Solutions training and also studied with Jerome Wagner. Denise is passionate about dreams, shamanism, mythology and the Enneagram, and she's tracked her own dreams for 30 years. Since the end of September 2020, Denise has given Enneagram training to over 80 health professionals from a broad spectrum of disciplines. This training is available online very affordably, and the link is in the show notes. I tracked Denise down out of curiosity to know how a Jungian analyst uses the Enneagram in their work. I was also curious to know of any patterns between Enneagram types and the Jungian archetypes, and also dreams, the types of dreams or images in dreams that the various Enneagram types might come in with. As usual, things are a lot more nuanced than that. So this conversation is a discussion around how Denise uses the two frameworks in her work. At the end of the interview, there's some really nice pointers for how to court a more vivid dream life and benefit from the insight and awareness of doing so. I hope that you enjoy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to this interview. I love talking about dreams. I love talking about the Enneagram. So I'm looking forward.
So can we start, Denise, by you sharing a little bit about the form your work currently takes in the world, and then a little bit about when and how you first became interested in the Enneagram?
Okay, sure. I am a clinical psychologist in private practice, and I see mainly adults individually, either in person or online. And the work I do ranges kind of from helping people to build ego strength, to be more grounded in themselves, to function adequately in the world. You know, a lot of people are quite disabled by depression, anxiety, or dissociation from their authentic selves. And then, you know, people who are more healthy in the world, kind of a real depth investigation of who we are as human beings and our place in the world and on a spiritual level. Mm-hmm. So a lot of soul work and, of course, a lot of shadow work, which is what I really enjoy. You know, the starting point with any work is to increase awareness and people's consciousness about their own patterns. Mm-hmm. So the Enneagram can provide that entry point to start the conversation and start, you know, growing that consciousness, as is the case with dreams. I actually found my way to the Enneagram during my 4-year analytical training to become a Jungian analyst. Yeah, interesting kind of place to find it. Yeah, and this was a few years after I did my master's degree, which is required to practice as a licensed clinical psychologist. And what I really liked about this training is that it incorporated the most updated neuroscience, trauma perspectives, attachment research, and developmental theory with the more traditional Jungian and archetypal perspectives and dream work. So it was really just such a rich overview. But in addition to that, they also included some spiritual traditions, such as alchemy, which is very Jungian, of course, but also then there was this one lecture on the Enneagram. And at the time, I was looking for a tool to do some corporate coaching work, and immediately recognized the potential of the Enneagram. It was such a bridge between the depth work that I was learning to do and kind of taking it into a corporate space where you need a different kind of language. And of course, with synchronicity at play, which was a term that was coined by Jung. An advertisement for the Jungian training came up on my social media feed with Integrative Enneagram. I saw you also trained with them. Now 2 in-depth trainings with them later, some training with Jerome Wagner, as well as really just immersing myself, you know, love reading, watching, you know, lectures or listening to podcasts. I actually use it quite extensively in my therapeutic work, which wasn't originally what it was intended for, but yeah, thought it could be this extra thing that I can, you know, take to corporate. And now I really kind of almost use it alongside the other tools that I have. It's not a separate thing for me.
And can I be geeky and ask what the experience like was finding your type? What is your type?
When I read my type, I was blown away. This explained 10 years of therapy. I mean, I don't mind sharing my type, but I must just add a word to it. I'm a woke 9. And it really made me aware of how I would avoid conflict in the therapy space by not perhaps really bringing in an ability and a capacity to work with conflict better, to really confront clients when they need to be confronted, as opposed to just letting things slide because it's easier. My therapeutic style have changed a lot from being very client-centered, which of course it still is, but now it's got added kind of, I really call people out. I don't hold back and say, I don't say it. Which when I started out as a therapist, being a 9, I was a lot more passive, I suppose.
I think that pattern must extend beyond 9s. I definitely share that pattern in my coaching practice of a sort of hesitation to hold people to account in that sort of direct way that you can see other people do. Can you, in simple terms, explain what it is? So what is Jungian analyst work, what the goal of it is, and what the foundational tenets are?
So Jungian analysis is a depth perspective about working with the unconscious, and particularly with the archetypal patterns and the shadow. And the shadow was also a term that was coined by Carl Jung. So there's a lot of overlap between the Enneagram and Jungian work because of the terminology. There's a lot of terminology that was borrowed from Jungian thinking. Mm-hmm. So I think Enneagram thinkers are very familiar talking about the shadow and thinking about the shadow and, those traits and feelings, that we dislike or ignore or disown and in denial. Jung believed that we don't like to look at our shadows, and when we don't, we project it onto other people. So that's the qualities we often cannot stand in someone else. It's what we need to look at, what we can't see in ourselves. Goals would differ from person to person. Of course, anybody comes to therapy for a different reason, but the underlying aim you could summarize in a quote of Jung where he says, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." What he refers to is what he termed the journey of individuation. And individuation simply means becoming your unique innermost self, in all its facets. Individuation is not the same as individualism, which is more ego-driven. It's really about almost sinking into that ground of being, that who you really are before you were programmed and conditioned by society and your family. That is a lifelong journey. The work is just never done, but it is about greater consciousness to your inner world. Another of Jung's contributions was the idea of our archetypal underpinnings. So the Enneagram, talks about our archetypes, and all human behavior are guided by archetypes. Every response you give, every little pattern you can see in a movie or in a book, these are archetypes, and archetypal energy is very powerful. This is why myths and fairy tales have endured over time. And this is how I think about the Enneagram as well, that each type is an archetype. Yeah. Then a major contribution of Jung was also what we call his complex theory. A lot of people would be a little bit familiar with the idea of like there's a superiority complex or inferiority complex. That's the same thing. And we talk about guilt complexes or shame complexes or an abandonment complex or in those kind of things. So what Jung is saying is there's the archetype, and then the interaction between the archetype and our personal experience creates a kind of complex, because there's almost a bit of a twisting of the archetype that happens. So what you kind of see in people's behavior is not the pure archetype. I do also see the Enneagram types as archetypal energies and patterns. And does the Jungian psychology also have a set of archetypes, so the hero archetype and the jester archetype? So there isn't just one map. Like each Jungian writer will bring in their own idea around archetype. So Jung talked about the mother archetype and the father archetype. Not archetypes, sorry, a complex. That's based in the archetype. So there's a general idea in humanity about what a mother could be. And it's got a positive side and a negative side. I mean, you've got the positive nurturing mother, and you've got we call the deaf mother, the devouring mother, and you've got the same with the father. So Jung wrote mostly about mother and father archetypes. And then each Jungian thinker just elaborated. Okay, but so we get many different archetypes. You get, for instance, the wise old man, which is also something Jung wrote about. And if you take that, you could somewhat overlay it on the Enneagram 5.
Right.
As somebody who seeks knowledge and kind of, wisdom and all of that. So it's not just one set of archetypes and that's the be all. And this is kind of why I look at the Enneagram and I think, oh, but these are also a set of archetypes. These are descriptions of patterns, and patterns have a life of its own. And we do describe patterns through the lens of what we see it.
You've alluded to it a little bit, but how do you bring the two frameworks together in your work?
I keep the frameworks in mind as, like I said, a map. And it's just kind of to provide pointers. For me, Jungian analysis is about recognizing patterns, whether it is the broader patterns within humanity at large or whether how that patterns manifest in individuals. The Enneagram's a tool for recognizing some of the patterns. And it's about increasing awareness for people. So whatever can be helpful for a specific person to recognize certain of their patterns. For some people, it is helpful to have a label. They would say, that's my Enneagram 4 pattern coming up again. And then I said, okay, well, let's just look at what is it exactly that's coming up.
I like that because I think we quickly latch on to these things that we might not even be doing. I've definitely done that.
Yeah. And then, because I've also seen how people can use the Enneagram labels as almost as an excuse. It's just who I am. And I said, okay, well, let's just look at more closely at what is this that you think you are. It's just ways of how what Jung would call the persona and shadow aspects will show up. And persona is a little bit like in Enneagram language, the idealized self-image.
Right.
So it's that mask you want to put on.
So the Enneagram's useful to you as an offering for people to be able to see their own patterns where you feel that's useful. You can give them the Enneagram and give them the framework. And is there a process in Jungian analysis or psychotherapy that you follow, and then the Enneagram's sort of a content tool?
In Jungian analysis, we talk about the proper relationship between ego and archetype and the self. And it's like an alignment between ego self. So it's not about getting rid of ego, but because ego plays an important role, it's kind of our anchor in this world. It's that bridge between our inner and outer world. It's what allows people to function. So it's about assigning the appropriate role for ego, but it being in conversation with the archetype of the self, which is a kind of deeper, wiser part of us that's kind of steer the process.
Yeah.
I don't think all Jungian analysts would agree with me. For me, there's a natural resonance between the two frameworks, not just because the terminologies are the same. I mean, it's borrowed from Jungian thinking, but it's because it's of the patterns. We want to see patterns in the world because that's how we learn and we evolve. If you can recognize a pattern, you can predict something. If you can predict something, you know how to adjust your own behavior. Yeah.
When you said about you're not sure other Jungian analysts would agree with you, and one of the reasons I was so excited to find you is because the Jungian field or Jungian analyst work is very credible, robust sort of profession. And the Enneagram, although we're sort of getting there in the field, it still hasn't got the quite the same credibility. I suppose I'm curious to know, what would the objection be? Because to me, it seems so obvious that they complement one another.
Look, Jung also had his categorization of personality.
The Myers-Briggs system.
Yes. So people tend to favor that. Anything that's newer or perhaps, is not so embedded in a certain field might just be frowned upon. People are also not exposed to the Enneagram as much. So sometimes when you don't know what's something, and also I think what puts people off is the descriptions. But I think what people don't understand is those aren't kind of definitive statements about a person.
Yeah. Let's move on to dreams. So there's a major aspect of Jungian work is the analysis of dreams. And we're going to look at two dreams from an Enneagram perspective.
First of all, I mean, just to say that there are different approaches to dreams. And the one approach is just to let the image speak to you without interpreting the dream, without saying this means that. So you can resonate with a dream and kind of know that it talks about a fear or a secret wish without necessarily unpacking the meaning of the dream. When you seek a more interpretive approach, there's a very Jungian approach to it. And one of them is just to always keep in mind that there is no fixed symbols. So to look at fresh eyes at each dream. So please just throw away the dream dictionaries.
Right. Yeah.
And it's really about trusting your own intuition. Sometimes, whatever comes up in relation to that dream, and it might be a memory, it might be the feeling or a sensation, or just a kind of knowing, to use that as a starting point. Kind of almost say, okay, this is the entry point to me, maybe understanding this better. It's never about this means that. It's more really about letting the dream image speak to you, let understand it. And of course, the golden rule is always the dreamer. It's the only one that really knows what their dream means, even if you don't.
Right.
So dream appreciation for me is really kind of a marriage between tending to dreams in that way, interpreting it. And we talk about the objective viewpoint and the subjective viewpoint, and I'll explain that if we have time. And what I bring in as well is the more shamanic approach. Do you want me to quickly say a little bit about the objective or subjective viewpoint?
Yeah.
Let me start with the objective viewpoint. That kind of says that real people in the dream represents the real people in your life.
Right.
And it's saying something about them. It's giving you valuable information about them or your relationship about them, which often can include what you project on them, what your subjective experience are of them and your interactions with them. So that has a valid place. But I think most Jungian analysts favors the subjective viewpoint, which has the basic premise that everything in the dream, all the characters and aspects and landscape is all parts of you. So a dream might be a conversation between these different self states and saying something. So it's a kind of dialogue. We tend to think of ourselves as I, but I think we all know instinctively that there's so many different parts of you and they don't always see eye to eye. Dreams can then help you to understand perhaps parts of yourself that are hidden. Your waking psyche have a viewpoint, but that's a one-sided viewpoint. It's not taking into consideration everything about you and who you are. So the dream comes and it throws up this, oh, but what about this? I think it gives us the opportunity to incorporate or integrate different aspects of ourselves that we don't think about. So it's not about acting it out, but about becoming aware that there are these shadow aspects in yourself. I mean, most of us would like to think, we don't have murderous feelings, but we do.
Yeah, right.
And it's so important because if we don't acknowledge the darker side, we act it out.
Right.
So I'll read the dreams, but also just to say with dreams and the way we think about dreams is that there is what we call universal symbols or archetypal symbols.
Right.
And if you think about it, as human beings, we've always lived somewhere. You always had a dwelling, whether that dwelling was a tent or a hut or a cave. So having a dwelling, and in modern times, a house or an apartment, is an important part of our psyche.
Yeah.
It's not something that stands separately. So if we think about the image of a house in a dream, it can give us a lot of information of where we are in life. So the first dream, I'm just going to speak in first person because that's usually, obviously how you record dreams. I am in a rondavel, which is a round hut structure, and the walls around me are lined with books. I'm trying to get out of a door, but I'm prevented from leaving by the piles of books I'm carrying in my arms. Let's just quickly look at that dream in terms of the Enneagram. What would come to mind?
So the dream conjures for me or evokes a yearning for freedom. And what are the walls? They're lined with books, but they're carrying the books. So it's like they're being weighed down and prevented from being free of the house with the books.
If you think about the Enneagram 5, we're constantly seeking for knowledge to keep them safe. Their core desire to know, to be competent, to be capable, where they're constantly moving away from ignorance towards knowledge and understanding. But at the same time, that fear that they might not be clever enough, or that they don't have enough knowledge. And I think often, one of the things that might appear as part of that Enneagram 5 pattern is that sitting with all this knowledge, but not moving out in the world with it.
Okay, so it's sort of obvious now that you point it out. Would this literally be the sort of dream that someone would share with you in a practice?
Can you hold that question?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to answer it, but I want us to go to the second dream, and then I want to bring the two dreams together.
Lovely. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so the second dream is I am in a mansion showing some young man around before taking them outside. I seem to live here, but I'm still awed by the beautiful, impressive exterior facade, which makes it seem multi-storied when indeed it's not. It was similar to an old Cape Dutch farmhouse that I previously lived in, but the outside is much more elaborate, more like a glamorous boutique hotel from a movie, as opposed to the humble abode that it is inside. What did you make of that one?
About maybe imagining elaboration and beauty when it isn't, and not being with mundanity and ordinariness. So I'm thinking about 7 and 4 here with this dream.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, that didn't cross my mind, but can you see how one can actually think about a dream in different ways? So it sometimes do help to know the person. And I think that's important. We can't apply meaning on a dream outside the context of the person themselves.
Yeah.
When I did think about this dream, and especially the discrepancy between the interior and the exterior, that's so elaborate. I thought about the Enneagram 3's image consciousness, being well groomed and stylish and ambitious, and it just felt like that outside, which is more elaborate, what it really is, or what it seems more elaborate.
Yeah.
Because in the dream, it looks like that from the outside, but it isn't like that in the inside. These are examples of dreams people would bring, but these are my own dreams.
Right.
And what I wanted to demonstrate with them is how in different times of my life, different things came forward. Because there was a time that I was just studying, and I can never know enough, and I would very much over prepare for everything and have so much dense information, but I can't speak about it off the cuff and freely. So I very much felt like I'm so surrounded by knowledge, but yet I can't get out of the door. I just want more and more, because I didn't feel like I would ever be knowledgeable enough.
Yeah. So it's like the archetype of the 5 in your type 9 personality.
This is where Catherine Verve's tritypes. For me, it made a lot of sense, because I could see, I definitely saw the Enneagram 9 having played out in my life in terms of avoidance of conflict and, not necessarily voicing what I want and my truth and all of that. But I could see the Enneagram 5 too, that always seeking for knowledge. I mean, when I was a small kid, I would read the encyclopedia, for goodness sake. So curious for learning and knowledge. And I still am. As you can see, I've got so many different interest fields. One wasn't enough. I needed to put the Enneagram in there, and to put shamanism, everything.
And this is part of you having maybe 5 in your archetypally, 5 in your tritype, and the 3 dream, you have a connection point to 3, so there will be 3 themes in your
definitely. And I think, like in one of the trainings that I had, we were very lucky to have Dirk Klute give the training. I have to walk the mat from a 9 to the 3, and feeling into that and that fear of shining. Dirk made me stand on the chair to shine. But it's kind of, that clicked something for me, and I did have people project on me a kind of envy, like, oh, you're such a competitive person, and I'm like, people who are familiar with Enneagram, so I kind of, hang on, I'm actually not an Enneagram 3. What you are seeing is a part of me that have chosen to excel, part of me that are embracing kind of, achievement.
Yeah. I wondered whether there's, for each Enneagram type, if it's possible to do this around using their dreams as a doorway to the unconscious, or as a way to develop awareness.
I don't know if I have specific advice for each Enneagram type, but, just in general, if you look at, like we spoke a little bit about the symbol of a house, to work with the image as to what is it telling you about you and about where you are at? What is your associations? For instance, if you dream about vehicles, what kind of vehicle are you dreaming? And I mean, I don't have enough evidence to make a definitive statement, but everybody that has an Enneagram 3 pattern dreams about spaceships.
Oh, really?
Their vehicle of getting around, not the spaceship out there, but their vehicle of getting around. So it's not, ordinary cars or anything. Maybe it's not like that for everyone, but it is something that I'm picking up as a pattern. Okay, but the question then to ask is, are you the passenger or are you in the driver's seat? Is it going fast? Is it going slow, backwards? Do you have a flat wheel? I mean, I've worked with an Enneagram 3 who dreamt of, his spaceship was stranded because it had a flat wheel and it would have cost an exorbitant amount of money to fix the wheel.
Right.
So at the time, this client was recovering from a depression. So there isn't the energy to really achieve those big life goals, but just to kind of, okay, now you need to stay put for a while. Yeah. You're not going anywhere.
So paying attention to dreams around places of dwelling, travel, vehicles, these are all sort of quite significant dreams.
Yeah, and just kind of, what does it mean for you?
So someone like me, because I haven't been giving this aspect of my inner life attention, I don't remember my dreams very easily. And someone told me a while back to set the intention before I sleep to remember a dream. Is that a good thing for everyone to do?
So dreams respond very well to attention.
Right.
So literally just about what attitude are you holding to dreams? What importance do you give to dreams? So my dream practice is every morning when I wake up, after I made my coffee, I have 30 minutes to record dreams.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So sometimes I use the full 30 minutes, sometimes it's only 5 minutes. And I just write them down. So to record the dream, to anchor them in this world is one of the first steps. I found that having, experimented a little bit between typing up my dreams so I could categorize them, dreams doesn't like that. So I had less dreams. But when I went back and I got myself a beautiful book, and it's specifically only for dreams, I remember a dream every morning. But maybe a useful thing, if you struggle to remember the dreams, is in your day-to-day things. If you notice things that are unusual. So for instance, if you're walking down the road and there's a leaf lying on the ground and you just notice the leaf because of that particular shape, to pick up the leaf and to put it next to your bed. And kind of use that as the object and say, please be the entry to my dreams.
Oh, that's so lovely. I love that idea. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So, and, there is things, like dream incubation, where you can ask a specific question, write it down, the question, write it down specifically. And just, you might not get an answer or a dream the first night. Because dreams, you almost have to, I don't know if you know the story of the prince with the fox. Where the prince had to kind of wait for the fox to come to it. So the prince just had to show up every day at the same time in the same spot. And eventually the fox will come closer and closer. One day it sat down with it.
Do you have to court the fox by just showing up and being available to receive impressions, I guess?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. My next interviewee is John Lukovic, who will be talking with me about his 3 approaches, the framework he developed around how to integrate and work with our instincts. Don't forget to subscribe.